Guano. It is the word for the droppings of seabirds. And in the 19th century, it was worth more than almost anything on earth. Not gold, not silver, the waste of seabirds, scraped off barren islands and sold by the shipload to the great powers of the world. For 30 years, it built palaces, paid armies, and made fortunes. Then it ran out, and the country that owned more of it than anyone collapsed into a war it could not win. This is the story of the strangest fortune of the 19th century and how it rose and fell. Begin with the islands. Off the coast of Peru, a chain of small, rainless islands sat under the path of enormous flocks of seabirds. For thousands of years, the birds had nested there. And for thousands of years, their droppings had piled up, layer upon layer, undisturbed by rain, baking in the dry coastal air. On some islands, the deposits were over 150 feet deep, a white mountain of waste, centuries in the making. The native peoples of the Andes had known about it for generations. They carried it inland to feed their crops. They understood what the rest of the world did not yet, that this stuff was the most powerful fertilizer anyone had ever found. Here is why it mattered. By the early 1800s, the farms of Europe and North America were exhausted. Centuries of planting had drained the soil. Crops were failing. Populations were growing. And there was no cheap way to make tired land fertile again. Then samples of Peruvian guano reached Europe. Farmers tested it, and the results were staggering. Fields that had given up came back to life. Yields doubled. A single ship of grey dust could revive an entire region of dying farmland. The world went mad for it. What followed was one of the great booms in history. Peru, which happened to own the richest islands, suddenly held a near monopoly on the most sought-after substance on the planet. The government took control of the trade, and the money poured in. Between the 1840s and the 1870s, Peru shipped millions of tons of guano to Europe and the United States. The wealth was almost beyond counting. Peru abolished slavery, paid off foreign debts, and built railways and grand buildings on the strength of bird waste. Historians would later call these years the Guano era. But mining it was a nightmare. The deposits had to be cut by hand in choking clouds of ammonia dust under a brutal sun on islands with no water and no shade. Peru could not find enough men willing to do it, so it imported them. Tens of thousands of laborers were shipped in from China under contracts that were slavery in all but name. They worked the islands in terrible conditions, and many never left them. The grey gold that revived the farms of the world was dug by men who were worked to death. And the rest of the world noticed the money. In 1856, the United States passed an extraordinary law, the Guano Islands Act. It declared that any American citizen who found an unclaimed island covered in guano could take possession of it in the name of the United States. A law written and passed to let private citizens annex islands for bird droppings. Under it, the United States laid claim to dozens of islands across the Pacific and Caribbean, some of which it still holds today. That is how valuable this waste had become. Nations were writing it into law. Men were dying for it. Fortunes were built on it. And then it ran out. The problem with a mountain of bird droppings is that once you start shipping it away by the millions of tons, it does not come back. The richest deposits, centuries in the making, were stripped down to bare rock in a few decades. The white mountains shrank. The easy money thinned. Worse, the world found a replacement. In the deserts of southern Peru and Bolivia lay vast fields of sodium nitrate, a mineral that did much of what guano did, and that existed in far greater quantities. The fertilizer trade began to shift from the islands to the nitrate fields, and those fields became the new prize. This is where the fortune turned to ruin. The nitrate deposits sat in a stretch of desert where the borders of Peru, Bolivia, and Chile met and blurred. As the value of that ground became clear, the three nations went to war over it. It is remembered as the War of the Pacific. Chile, better armed and better led, crushed both its neighbors. Bolivia lost its entire coastline and remains landlocked to this day. Peru lost territory, lost its nitrate wealth, and lost the war. The country that had been made rich by bird droppings had built its prosperity on a substance that could only run out. And when the world moved to the mineral that came next, Peru went to war for it and lost everything. The Guano Islands still sit off the Peruvian coast. The birds still nest there. The droppings still pile up, slowly, as they always have. But the mountains are gone, cut away within a single lifetime. For 30 years, the waste of seabirds was worth more than almost anything on Earth. It revived dying farmland. It moved the borders of nations, and it was carried across oceans by the shipload. And like every fortune built on a thing that cannot last, it ended the only way it could. The richest deposits in the world gone, and the country that owned them ruined.